was known as the Sword of Allah, one of the greatest generals in history, one of Islam's greatest heroes. His name, Khalid ibn Walid. Sunnahfollowers presents a new series presented by Ustadh Mukhtar Shaheed. Coming soon, so stay tuned. Streaming on all major platforms. Channel Sunnahfollowers.
Actual credible sources that we have, and that a lot of times the disbelievers have tried to paint Khalid as this warmongering, barbaric savage. And alhamdulillah, we understand that this is a person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had definitely blessed with the ability and the courage to fight, and he did it in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We've started when he was born, what tribe he was from, what they were known for, his activities prior to Islam, and he becomes Muslim. And during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he became Muslim, he was not as active. We really get a chance to see the military genius of him under the caliphate of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And the last several classes that we've had, we've dealt with a lot of dealing with the Persian Empire. And alhamdulillah, this is historically one of the greatest empires, if the not greatest empire in history, in terms of time, the amount of territory they were able to gain. And we see that through Allah's permission, the Muslims came up through the desert and annihilated pretty much the Persian Empire, or the Persian army, and it had a rippling effect. And so now the Muslims are concentrating their efforts on the Byzantine Empire, also known as the Roman Empire. When they converted to Christianity, from my understanding, this is when they became the Roman Empire, and they are, if not the second greatest, if not the same as the Persian Empire would have been. Okay, so you have a situation where an individual who was inspired by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a course of 23 years had changed the whole entire peninsula, its mentality, its values, its mores, its all of these things that they did for hundreds of years. And in the course of 23 years, this whole way of life changed. And this is only something that can be inspired by God. This is only something that can be inspired by the truth. And the fact that they were disunited and Islam united them. And now a group of people that were taken as a joke throughout the world, in this part of the world, they were looked down like dogs on the Persians. They would look like dogs from the Romans. And we'll get the chance to see, as we go through this journey, the disdain that the Roman Empire had for the Arabs particularly. So you had some situations, a lot of situations where the Arabs on the border parts of Arabia going to what's called Asham, which is a conglomerate of a lot of different areas: Syria, Palestine, Jordan, and then there's some other places that was considered Asham. And so the Muslims, the Arabs themselves, were familiar with these places because a lot of them by trade were people who dealt in caravans, and they were tradesmen. Okay, and so they knew about these places. They had went to some of these places, interacted with some of the people, but like I said before, Islam, or the Arabs themselves, were looked at as basically like scum to the Persian and the Roman Empire. And so you have a force coming out of the desert and doing things that they never ever thought would be possible for them to be able to do. And the difference between the Persian and the Roman Empire had it consisted of a lot of different ethnic groups: Slavs, Franks, Arabs, some other Armenians. You know, they were all involved in this in this army. And they, even though a lot of these empires had internal problems, their military strength was on point. Okay, and their leadership was a little bit different as well. Okay, and so now the Muslims are dealing with Christians. Before, the Persians were somewhat like polytheists. A lot of them worshipped idols too. They worshipped fire, and now they're going into lands of the Christians. And this is where we have the first interactions between the Muslims and the Christians that would last for centuries. Okay, so Abu Bakr goes and he sends out these credible generals as far as their bravery, their Islamic zeal, and for their piety. So people like Abu Ubaidah, Amr bin Aus, Shurahabil, and a couple of other notable companions had gone out, and he had sent them to different parts of the Roman Empire. He made Abu Ubaidah the military commander over everyone, and Khalid was still dealing in the probably in Hira, dealing in the Persian Empire. When the Muslims had gotten word of the amount of soldiers, it was something like between 90 and 100,000 that were amassing their forces in order to deal with the Muslims, because the Caesar is now tired of Islam. Before, it was like they was a joke. They was somebody not to send a couple people out there to deal with them. We should be done with them in no time, and this is just it. And now they hearing about all of these victories that Khalid is doing, and now it has the Caesar's attention. So his thing is like, okay, well, you know what? We're going to amass a huge army, and we're going to annihilate them once and for all. And so Abu Ubaidah, he sends a message to Abu Bakr, and he tells them, listen, we in a situation that we didn't anticipate. It's 100,000 of them. They grossly outnumber us, okay? And we know from the battle of Uhud, Badr, Khandaq, Khaybar, these kind of battles, the Muslims, for the most part, were always outnumbered anyway. This is not nothing new, okay? But they're looking like 100,000. It might be 30, 40,000 of them, okay? And so he sends a letter. Abu Bakr says, listen, I know what to do. I'm going to send the sword of Allah, and I'm going to get them to destroy, or get him to destroy this army. And so this is where we are now. And so now the Muslims are going deeper into Syria. All right. So he started his Syrian campaign wearing a coat of chainmail, and it belonged to Musaylama. He also took Musaylama had a really nice sword, and he took that. And this was one of the trophies that he had gotten from Yamama. All right. So over his chain helmet, he wore a red turban, and under his helmet, he wore a red cap. And in this cap, you could see a few black lines. And in the eyes of Khalid, his cap was more precious than the weapons and armor. And inshallah, we'll talk about that later as to why, what was in his cap that was more precious than anything that he had on him. He also carried a black standard that was given to him by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it was known as the eagle. All right. So a standard was like a flag that, you know, when you under an army, that the people would come in with a flag and stuff like that representing the army. And this particular flag that he had was black in color, and it belonged to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it actually had a name to it. So Khalid had took 9,000 of his fighters. These are all veterans now who had fought all of these vicious battles against the Persian Empire. So now these are seasoned veterans. Okay, these are people that were with him fighting Musaylama, and then now they're going and they're fighting the Persian Empire. And we talked about all of the major bloody battles that they did. So he's got 9,000 of these fearless veteran fighters that's with him. Half of them, because remember, he and Muthanna had a disagreement. So half of them is the Mujahirs and the Ansar. You know what I mean? So he had them, a lot of them with him. So he traveled with some of the bravest and youngest of the army. And it was in his ranks, his own son, who had just turned 18. So mashallah, he might have been 16, 17, where they were engaging in these battles with the Persian Empire. And he had Abdurrahman, who was Abu Bakr's son, and Rafi, who was the one that led them through that harsh desert condition. He was young, and he was also Khalid's son-in-law too, which is something that a lot of people didn't know. Okay, so he had these people with him. Of course, Al-Qaqa he had with him, and then he has Zarar bin Al-Azwar, and this person, inshallah, we're gonna hear about because he was slim, he was muscular, and he had energy to fight. It seemed like fight forever. So he has these people with him. Then he has the Dirar, and Dirar is Khalid's right-hand man. Dirar has done other stuff, and inshallah, we are going to really see Dirar in this class. This individual is he's something else, and so he is Khalid's right-hand man. He would be given the most daring missions, and he would be, in terms of being reckless, he disregarded any of that stuff, and Allah allowed him to survive all kinds of situations that he was in. And so early in the afternoon, they reached a place called Suwa, and this was the first settlement near the border of Syria. And it was an oasis surrounded by a grassy area and a land used to graze large flocks of sheep and cattle. So they're moving through this settlement, and Khalid had put down any type of resistance, and they took all of that stock and they used it for food supply for the campaign. So the next day, they arrived in a place called Arak, not Iraq, but Arak. This is with an A-R-A-K, and this was fortified. It was a fortified town defended by a garrison of Christian Arabs under the command of a Roman officer. So this garrison had retired, and they thought that basically they saw the Muslims there, but they figured that the Muslims arrived and they were going to maybe rest, and then they could deal with them later. But Khalid and them being as seasoned as they were, as soon as they arrived, it was ready to fight. And mashallah, with his reputation, they did a peaceful surrender. So in Arak lived an old scholar who kept himself informed of what was going on with the affairs of the world. So when he heard that it was a hostile army that was coming across the desert, he asked, is the standard of this army a black one? And the commander tall? Is he a powerfully built, broad-shouldered man with a large beard and a few pockmarks on his face? And so the ones that have been close enough to Khalid, they said, yeah, that's definitely him. And he said, then beware of fighting this army. And so the Roman garrison commander made an offer to surrender the fort that they were in and was astonished at the generous terms that the Muslims had offered them. So beyond the payment of the jizya, the people of Iraq would pay or suffer nothing. Okay, they would pay, they would suffer no type of nothing. So the pact was signed, the fort was surrendered, and the Muslim army camped on the outside of that fort that particular night. So the next morning, Khalid dispatched 2 columns to subdue a place called Sukhna and Qadma. And this is at the same time, a camel rider would find and look for Abu Ubaidah. Because remember, Khalid had gotten a letter from Abu Bakr that he was going to be the commander even over Abu Ubaidah. So this is why he's running towards Syria. Okay. So at the same time, Abu Ubaidah, he gets this letter as well. So with the main body of his army, Khalid marched towards a place which is modern day Palmyra. And when the columns was sent by Khalid, they arrived at these 2 places that we talked about. The people were actually very joyful. The inhabitants of this place was joyful. So the Muslims are going in thinking that they get ready to have a big fight on their hands. And the citizens of that place were happy that the Muslims were there. And they had heard about the generous terms that he had given to the other place, and they started a peaceful surrender. Okay, and so soon after the surrender was negotiated, and its inhabitants agreed to pay the jizya, and another term was that they feed any Muslim warrior that passed around in their town. Okay, so the Arab chief of Tadmur also presented Khalid with a prize horse, and Khalid used it in several battles for his campaigns. So from Tadmur, the army marched to Ajadayn, and the inhabitants which resisted the Muslims were immediately and quickly defeated, and their place was the spoils and stuff was taken from there. So the next stop was a place called Huwarin, and this is about 10 miles beyond Ajadayn, and it contained large herds of cattle. So as the Muslims gathered in the cattle, it was attacked by thousands of Arabs, and the local inhabitants was reinforced by a contingent from the tribe of Ghassan, okay, from Busra, and these are the people who did not help in Huwarin, and so they were defeated real quick by the Muslims as well. So Abu Ubaidah had occupied a district, and it was northeast of the river of Yarmouk. So under his command, he had 3 corps of Muslims on his own. So Yazid, who was Abu Sufyan's son, Shahrabil, famous Sahaba, but he hadn't fought any battles, and he captured no towns. So he was in this area to kind of keep some of these people at bay. So one place which worried him a great deal was Busra. This was Abu Ubaidah's thinking. And so the large town, which is the capital of the Ghassan kingdom, and it was garrisoned by a strong force of Romans and Christian Arabs and the command of a Roman officer. All right. So when Khalid was clearing the region of eastern Syria, Abu Ubaidah came to know that he would come under Khalid's command, and he would when Khalid had gotten there. So he decided to take Busra quickly, so Khalid didn't have to worry about this. And mashallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raise Abu Ubaidah in the highest of rank, because he had good intentions. So his thing was, well, let's go. We've been sitting here. Khalid is on his way. Let's see if we can try to deal with this situation. He doesn't have to worry about that. So he sent 4,000 men to capture Busra. But when Shahrabil marched to Busra, the garrison of which withdrew into the town, when they heard that the Muslims were coming, they had 12,000 soldiers with them. And they expected more Muslim forces would arrive soon. And he was only like to be some type of a detachment and an advanced guard. So it remained within the walls of the fort, and he camped, Shahrabil camped on the western side of the town and positioned groups of his men all around the fort. All right. So for 2 days, nothing happened. And the following day, as Khalid set out for the last day, marching towards Busra, the garrison of the town came to give battle to the Muslims. So on the 3rd day, it's like, okay, we've been waiting long enough. We're going to go ahead and we're going to go outside and fight the Muslims. So both forces formed up a battle, and the first were talks between Shahrabil and a Roman commander, at which the Muslims offered, as usual, what are the terms? Islam, become Muslim, pay the jizya, or you're going to fight us. Those are the only 3 terms that you're going to get. So the Romans chose to fight. And in the middle of the morning, the battle had begun. So the first 2 hours continued at a steady pace, and neither side made any major headway. But as soon as the midday, the superior strength of the Romans began to tell. So they started taking a toll on the Muslims. There's 12,000 of them against 4,000. So the Romans were able to move force around the Muslim flanks. This is the worst thing that could happen. And this is something that the Romans were, it's a term that they used. It's something, a maneuver that they were very good for. And if any of us ever saw any of us who ever watched Game of Thrones, they orchestrated this in a battle scene that they had. And so what it is, they come with you, and then they split like this, and their thing is to go around both of your flanks and encircle you in there so they could try to kill, and it'd be hard for you to try to fight them in that particular style. So when Khalid was about a mile away from Busra, he heard and carried the sounds of the battle to him. He could hear them in the distance. He heard them fighting. So immediately he ordered his men to jump on a horse, and as soon as the cavalry was ready, he led a hardcore press towards the battlefield. So besides him was Abdul Rahman, who was Abu Bakr's son, and Khalid told Khalid and the Romans had never met, because as soon as they heard that the Muslims were coming with more reinforcements, they all ran and retreated back into the fort. And Shahrabil was extremely happy because they might have took a major loss. They were fighting as hard as they could not to get surrounded from the right and the left flank. Okay. So Shahrabil, he was brave. He was a pious Muslim. He was in his mid-60s. Now he's getting in the middle of the fight in his mid-60s. So a close companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he used to write down the revelations. Then Allah would send the Quran. Shahrabil was one of those who would write down the revelations of the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is not just a minor person. This is an individual who was a major figure in Islam. Okay. So he was often addressed with the title scribe of the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So as a general, he was very competent. He was sound, and having to learn a great deal of war from Khalid, because he was in the Battle of Yamama, okay, and he was in the Iraq campaign. So he had ended up going back to Medina. We had talked about that last week when Khalid had sent him to go give a message to Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr wanted him to stay, and this is how he ends up coming from Medina, going back out into Syria. So when Khalid took a glance to assess the relative strength of the Muslims and the Romans, he wondered why Shahrabil had attacked them. And he says, he makes a comment like, don't you know this is an important frontier for them? This is something not to just run in there with a little bit. This takes a lot of planning. This is something that you shouldn't have did with a little bit of men that you got. And they were going to try and defend this with their heart and soul because it's extremely important to the Byzantine Empire. And then he said, like, look, what made you go in there like that with such a small force? And so he said, listen, Abu Ubaidah, he told me, he ordered us to go in there. And so Khalid makes the statement. He says, Abu Ubaidah is a man of purest character, but he doesn't know about the stratagems of war. MashaAllah. And this is true, and I think we did a class. No, I know we did about Abu Ubaidah, his piety, and his fighting. You know what I'm saying? Even after the death of Abu Bakr, you understand, and when Omar becomes the caliph, he's definitely a person whom all of the soldiers love him. Okay. So the next morning, the garrison, they were basically, the shock of Khalid coming is off of them now. You know what I mean? So it had worn off. They like, okay, it's 9,000 soldiers, 4,000. So we about equally matched now. It's 12,000 against about 13,000, 12,000. They about evenly matched. So they saying, okay, look, we're going to press our luck, and then we can go in there and we're going to try to fight the Muslims. So when the two armies formed up for battle in a plain outside of the town, Khalid kept his center under his own command. He appointed Rafi on the right wing, and he could put the Dirar as the commander on the left wing. So in front of the center, he placed a thin screen under Abdul Rahman bin Abi Bakr. So at the very start of the battle, Abdul Rahman dueled with the Roman army commander, and he defeated him. So the Roman general fled to safety in the Roman ranks, and Khalid then had a general attack along the entire front. So for some time, the Romans resisted bravely, while those who established a personal tradition would make this infamous Syria, this tradition that the Muslim would do in this Syrian battle, would make him a hero and like a myth almost. And this is Dirar. So because of the heat of the day, Zirar goes and he goes towards towards the fort. And because of the heat, what he did, he took off his coat of mail, and this made him feel lighter, and he was happy about that. So now he don't have any protection on. He just got a shirt. And then what he did, he took his shirt off, and he became, it said, like naked above the waist. So he got bare chest coming out. So this made him feel even lighter, and he was more pleased at the fact that he could throw down like this. So in his half dressed condition, he launched an assault against Romans, and he slaughtered every last one in single combat that came across them in this position. So within a week, the stories they called it the naked champion had spread all over Syria, and only the bravest of Romans would go against Dhirar and face him in combat. Okay? So after some fighting, the Roman army broke contact and withdrew into the fort, and then Khalid was fighting on foot in front of the center. Okay, then he turned, gave orders to commencement of the siege. He saw a horseman approaching through the ranks of the Muslims, and the horseman was to achieve fame and glory only second to Khalid. Okay, so a man in his early 50s, he was tall, with a wiry, slight stoop. His lean and clear-cut face was handsome. His eyes showed understanding and gentleness. His thin beard was dyed, so he probably had henna in his beard. His hand, which he held a standard, was only something that was carried by generals. And it was a yellow standard, and it's believed to be the standard that the Prophet ﷺ had when the Muslims went and defeated the people in the Battle of Khaybar. So his coat of mail didn't conceal the simple and inexpensive appearance of his clothes. He smiled at Khalid, and it revealed this gap in his teeth. In his front teeth, okay, and this was no other than Abu Ubaidah. So this is the gap in his teeth. He wasn't born like that. He had two teeth. Some is like one tooth, or he had two teeth missing. And he was the son of a surgeon, okay. And they called him the one without incisors. So he lost his front teeth. And you remember, we talked about this during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, is that he lost his front teeth in the Battle of Uhud, that the Prophet ﷺ was hit in the face, and this metal had dug into his face. It was bleeding, and Abu Ubaidah came and yanked this metal out of the Prophet ﷺ's face, and he lost both his teeth as a result of it. So he said he was, for somebody who had his teeth missing in the front, he was the most attractive of everyone. You understand what I mean? And so, alhamdulillah, this is one of the things of Abu Ubaidah. And his actual name was Amir bin Abdullah bin al-Jarrah. And his grandfather was the surgeon. And what the Arabs would do, if a family member was known for something famous, then he would be called by that person's name. So they called him, his name was al-Jarrah. And so he was kind of taken after or known by the achievements of his grandfather, not his father. Okay. So he was one of the top most Muslims in terms of Islamic history. He was one of the early converts. And the Prophet ﷺ said to him that every nation has its trusted one, and the trusted one in this nation is Abu Ubaidah. So thereafter, he became known as Amin ul Umat, the trusted one of this nation. And he was also one of the ones that was blessed out of the 10 that was promised paradise. Okay, so this was a man. He had been placed under Khalid, and a new commander. He looked at in terms of Khalid, known to Abu Ubaidah well in Medina. So when he got the letter that he was going to take over command of Abu Ubaidah, Khalid was a little apprehensive about that, because Abu Ubaidah was somebody who was extremely loved by the Muslims, and he felt that his position with Islam was higher than his. And so he says that when he goes to Abu Ubaidah, he's on his horse. So Abu Ubaidah smiles at him, and When he got near him, Abu Ubaidah was about to dismount on his horse. Now, it goes to show you how much respect that Khalid had for Abu Ubaidah. So he told him, he said, no, stay on your horse. He said, he came and he walked to him. And he said, they gave salams, they shook hands. And then this is Abu Ubaidah says to Khalid, he says, "O father of Suleiman, I've received with gladness that the letter Abu Bakr appointed you commander over me. There is no resentment in my heart, for I know your skill in matters of war." By Allah, replied Khalid, but for necessity of obeying the orders of the Caliph, I would never have accepted this command over you. And you are much higher than me in Islam, and I am a companion of the Prophet. But you are whom the Messenger of Allah had called the trusted one of this nation. And on this happy note, Abu Ubaidah became under the command of Khalid. Beautiful, beautiful exchange. It takes all of the thing with Shaitan out of the picture. You might have had guys that's pro Khalid. You had somebody was pro Abu Ubaidah. And then alhamdulillah, with the Islamic etiquette, they had this beautiful dialogue with each other. And he wanted, and what it did, he got a order, and Abu Ubaidah is showing whoever was pro Abu Ubaidah that I'm glad that this is happening. I have no resentment. I'm glad. I don't have a problem with nothing. And then alhamdulillah, Khalid then comes and says, listen, if it wasn't for the fact, I know how much of a companion you are, and I love you and I respect you, and I would never, if it wasn't for an order, I would never be commander over you. This beautiful exchange between these two believers and these two generals. So the Muslims now laid siege to Busra. So the Roman commander had lost hope, and he knew that most of the available reserves had started moving to a place called Ajadayn. And he doubted that any help was coming his way. So a few days of inactivity, he surrendered the fort peacefully, and the condition that Khalid imposed on Busra was the payment of jizya. Okay, so this surrender took place in the middle of July in the Hijri of the 13th year of Hijri and 634. Okay, so at this time, Yazid was still on the south of the river of Yarmouk. Amr bin Aus was still in the valley of Araba, and several detachments of the corps of Abu Ubaidah and Shahrabil was spread over the district of Huran. So Khalid wrote to all of the commanders to at once concentrate on Ajadayn. This is where the major forces is congregating. There's 100,000, 90,000 people. So the commander in the fort that they fought just now, he knew that they were preparing for a major battle, and then nobody was coming to get him. So he had to do what he had to do to save himself. So the Muslims marched. They took their wives and their children and a whole bunch of sheep that serves as a moving supply depot. So at Ajadayn would be fought the first mighty battle between Christianity and Islam. All right. So the battle of Ajadayn, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. How often has a small force vanquished a large force by permission of Allah? And Allah is with those who are steadily persevere. MashaAllah. So in the third week, and this is still in July, the Muslims marched from Busra, and they marched his army with this sight of not like a regular army. So as somebody who was a general, they would have disapproved how the Muslims were moving. It was more like a caravan. You know, we see people marching in rows, an army marching in rows and that kind of thing. So it was more like a caravan. So the soldiers of this army had no uniform. So there was no uniform of any kind. And there was nobody dressed alike. And the men could wear anything that they chose. And a lot of times they had stuff on it when they had beat people in Persia. And also when they just got finished fighting the Romans, they had their clothes on. They had took some of their clothes and they had those on. So there was no badges of rank, no insignia to distinguish a commander from the commanded. In fact, there were no officers so far as rank was concerned. So officership was appointed not by rank. So any Muslim could join the army, and regardless of his tribal status, would consider it an honor to serve in any of the ranks. So nobody is going trying to be a general and they want to be the guy, none of that other stuff. So the man finding as a simple soldier one day might find himself appointed a commander of a regiment or even a larger one the next. So officers were appointed to command the battle or the campaign. And once the operation was concluded, they could find themselves back in the ranks again. You know, so the army was organized on a decimal system started by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was in Medina. So the commanders, you might be a commander of 10 people, of 100 people, or 1,000 men, okay? Of corresponding to regiments. So a group of regiments to form a larger force was flexible, varying the situation of whatever was going on, okay? And so I think this is a beautiful thing. It gives everybody, we talked about this in the class about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what happens sometimes people think they want leadership, and then when they actually get tested with it and they see what they have to do, then what it does is that it takes away that lust for wanting power, and they get an opportunity to see what it's like and an appreciation for the commander who's given orders. So when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba will go out and fight jihad fi sabilillah, a lot of times he would leave different people in charge. So we know Abdullah ibn Maktoum, the blind person, he was left in charge before. Other Sahabas was left in charge before. And so this is the same type of thing that I think is an excellent idea, by putting different people in command. And then the next day is like, okay, alhamdulillah, we won that battle. You're just a regular soldier again, and somebody else might have that responsibility. So they could have any or all of the normally used weapons of the time: the lance, the javelin, the spear, a sword, a dagger, and a bow. For armor, they wore coats of mail and chain helmets. So remember, we talked about the Muslims, one of the advances that they had that the Persians didn't have is that the Muslims could move really quick because they didn't have all of this stuff weighing them down. The Persians had metal here, metal on their shins. They had a bow, they had a mace, they had all of these things, and it made them move kind of slow. So the Muslims had maybe a couple that may had a bow and arrow, and they had a sword, and then they had clothes on that was light, so they can move really fast. Okay, so the armor worn coats was mail and chain helmets, and these could be of any color or design. In fact, many of them have been taken by the Persians and the Romans. So most of the men mounted camels, and those who possessed horses formed the cavalry. So it was like they just totally dependent on the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There was no, wrong thing, and they in lines, and they got the same outfits on and that kind of thing. They didn't have any of that. So one of the remarkable features of the movement of the Great Army was that it was independent of lines of communication. So behind it stretched no line of supply, since it had no logistical base. And its food trotted along with the army. So they brought the cows and whatever else with them as they marching. And if they ran out of meat, the men, women, and children, because they were from the desert, they could survive on dates and water for a long period of time. All right. So it needed no roads for its movement, and it had no wagons, and everything was carried on camels. So these are people who are used to traveling. They can put a lot of stuff on camels, and they would be successful. So the army would go anywhere in any kind of terrain, so long as there was a path from which the animals could move. Men and animals could move. This eased the movement of the Muslims a tremendous edge over the Romans with mobility and speed. So although the army moved like a caravan, it gave the impression of an undrilled horde. Okay, so and the Muslims now established a group which is vast affair in view of the strength of about 32,000 men. So the largest Muslim force that had ever been assembled. So there's 32,000 Muslims, but they're getting ready to go against 100,000 of the Romans. So the camp stood about a mile from the Roman camp, which was even larger and lined the road from Jerusalem to Beit Jibrin. So the opposing camps ran like two parallel lines, and they laid out to enable the armies to take the field at a moment's notice without unnecessary movement. So the Muslims had taken a week to concentrate their army at Ajadayn, a task which took the army of the Romans for like 2 months for them to do it. The Muslims did it in a week. So the Roman army had a sophisticated military force, and they needed time for their movement. So they had to spend weeks in preparation and collecting supplies, wagons, horses, and issuing weapons and equipment. So it traveled with thousands of wagons and carriages. You got 100,000 people. You got to have a lot of stuff that you're traveling with. So it needed good roads for its movements. But over the 2 months that the Romans had successfully concentrated an army of 90,000 at Ajadayn under the command of a person named Wardan, the governor of Emesa. So another general, his name was Kubuklar, and he acted as the chief staff and the commander of everybody. So he was over Wardan. So the sight of this huge Roman camp, it kind of did a little something to the Muslims when they saw this. All right. And so only ones that weren't unmoved and scared necessarily was the 9,000 soldiers that was with Khalid. Remember, these we talked about, they veterans now. So they see this big army and was like, man, we fought people just like this already. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had granted us victory. So Khalid went around visiting the various units of his camp. And he spoke to the commanders and to the men. And he says, "O Muslims, know you, O Muslims, that you have never seen an army of Rum. And as you see now, if Allah defeats them by your hand, they shall never again stand against you. So be steadfast in battle and defend your faith. Beware of turning your backs on your enemy, for then the punishment will be the fire. And be watchful and steady in your ranks, and do not attack until I give you the order." So in the opposing camp, Wardan called a council of war, and he spoke to his generals. And he says, "O Romans, Caesar has placed his trust in you. If you are defeated, you will never again be able to make a stand against the Arabs. They will conquer your land and ravish your women. So be steadfast. When you attack, attack as one man and do not disperse your efforts. Seek the help of the cross. And remember that you are 3 to each one of them." So he's telling them, you outnumber them. Okay. So Khalid decided to send a scout on a reconnaissance mission. And Virar, he is the one that volunteered for this job. So he strips to his waist. He take his clothes stuff off in the top again. And then he rode up a little up the hillock in the center camp of the Roman camp. So he was seen, and a body of about 30 Romans they rode out to try to catch him. So as they approached, the Rar began to canter back to the Muslim camp. So he's running fast. And and when they drew near, he increased his pace. So he slowed down a little bit to try to give them courage to come and to try to capture him. But when he got closer to the Muslim camp, he made the horse start speeding up faster. So the purpose was to be able to draw them into the Muslim camp in case he needed assistance. But when he reached a spot between these two armies, he turned around, and then he started to attack them. And he brought down person after person after person after person. And it said that by the time he was done, out of 30, he had killed 19 of them. So he had been maneuvering his horse back and forth, and he knows how to fight good. He's maneuvering back and forth, and he killed 19 of them, and the rest of them galloped back to the camp and told him of the story of the naked champion. So here it is, this thing about him again. So on his return, he was greeted with the joy of the Muslims, but Khalid was upset with him. He looked at him and was mad, and he was like, "Man, I didn't tell you to go out there and do none of that stuff." So Durar replied, he was conscious of the possibility that Khalid was going to be upset. He said, but you understand, I knew what I was doing, basically. And so I took care of it, and I killed as many of them as I possibly could. So following the incident, the commander-in-chief of the Romans sent a Christian Arab into the Muslim camp. And he spent a day and a night with the Muslims and to gather all of the information about the strength, the quality of the Muslim army, so on and so forth. And the Christian Arab said this. He said, I had no problem with entering the Muslim camp, and because he was taken as a Muslim. He speaks Arabic. I'm sure he knows Salaam alaikum. You know, he knows all of the language in which Muslims, and you know, it's 32,000 of them. So it's easy for somebody possibly to do that, especially if they're an Arab, right? So the following day, he spends the night with them, and then he slips out and he returns back to the commander-in-chief of the Romans. And he says, by night, they are like monks. By day, they're like warriors. If the son of their ruler were to commit theft, they would cut off his hand. And if they were to commit adultery, they would stone him to death. Thus, they established righteousness among themselves. And he says, if what you say be true, this is the commander, it would be better to be in the belly of the earth than to meet such people upon its surface. I wish it were my portion from Allah to stay away from them, so that he would not have to help me either against them or them against me. So the men finished their morning prayers. Khalid ordered the move to battle positions, and he detailed instructions that they had been given the day before. So the Muslims moved forward, and they formed up in battle about a few hundred yards ahead of the camp. So Khalid deployed his army facing west and the front of about 5 miles, and he stretched sufficiently to prevent more numerous Roman army from overlapping their flanks. Remember, this is the worst thing that can happen. Your flanks can get surrounded. So the center was placed under Mu'adh ibn Jabal. And alhamdulillah, we haven't heard about Mu'adh in a long time, and so we know that he's on these famous Sahaba, famous narrator of hadith, and we know that he is in this battle with Khalid. So the left wing was under Sa'd ibn Amir. The right wing was Abdul Rahman, who was Abu Bakr's son. And the other left flank guard was commanded by Shahrabil. And the name of the commander, nobody knows who was on the right. That's been forgotten. So behind the center, Khalid placed 4,000 men under Yazid as a reserve for close protection of the Muslim camp to protect the women and the children. So Khalid's place was near the center and kept under a number of officers near him to be used as champions or commanders of groups needed for a specific task in battle. So the Amr bin Aus, Dirar, Rafi, and Omar's son Abdullah was was around Khalid. So when the Romans saw the Muslims moving, they rushed out and began to form up in battle positions about a half mile from the Muslim front line. So Wardan and the other commander, they stood surrounded by their bodyguards in the center, and a massive formation of the Romans carrying large crosses and banners, and they said it was an awe-inspiring sight. I can only imagine. So Khalid rode along the front, checking units and urging his warriors to fight in the name of Allah. And in a few words he said to each unit, he laid emphasis on concentrating their efforts in one attack as one man. Okay? So he even went and spoke to the women. And he went to the camp and he told them, he said, listen, be prepared to defend yourselves against any Romans that might break through the Muslim front. They assured him that it was this the least that they could do, and considering that they had not been allowed to fight in the Muslim army, mashallah. So you see the determination even of our sisters in participating in this particular situation. They was all game for it. So forming their positions, it took 2 armies a couple of hours. So when it was in readiness, and an old bishop wearing a black hat had emerged. He walked halfway towards the Muslim army and he called out in perfect Arabic, which one of you will come forth and talk to me? Muslims, we don't have any priests. And in those particular days, the commander was pretty much the imam. So Abu Ubaidah was the imam, Khalid was the imam. And so Khalid went forward to go talk to this bishop. So he asked him, he said, are you the commander of this army? And so Khalid tells him, so they regard me as long as I obey Allah and they follow example of his prophet. This is perfect in terms of what he's saying is for a specific reason. But if I fail in this, I have no command over them and no right to be obeyed. The bishop thought for a moment, then remarked, it is thus that you conquer us. Then he continued, know, O Arab, that you have invaded a land with no king dares to enter, which no kings dare to enter. The Persians enter it and they returned dismayed. Others also came and they fought with their lives, but could not attain what they sought. You have won over us up until now, but victory does not belong permanently to you. So remember, we talked about how part of battle is psychological. So the whole thing of dueling, going against the enemy in a duel, killing a good general or something, all of these things is to psychologically mess up the soldiers. So he's playing a word game with Khalid. Like, look, you know, you ain't the first person to come here and do this stuff. You know, somebody who we considered more of an opponent than you came in here and lost. You know what I mean? So you should just go ahead about your business, because you might have won one time, but you're not going to win this one. So he says, my master, Wardan, has inclined to be generous to you. He has sent me to tell you that if you take your army away from this land, he will give each of your men a dinar, a robe, and a turban. It's like $1 probably. And if there will be 100 dinars for you, and 100 robes and 100 turbans for you. This is what he tells Khalid. And he says, lo, we have an army as numerous as the atoms, and it is not like the armies that you have met before. With this army, Caesar has sent his mightiest generals and most illustrious bishops. So mashallah, this is a perfect mind. This dude is giving a really scary speech for somebody who doesn't, if they didn't have courage. So in reply, Khalid offered the usual alternatives, the jizya, conversion, or the sword. So without satisfaction, the Muslims, we're not leaving Syria. So as for the dinars and the fine clothes, well, it's going to be ours in a minute anyway, as soon as we beat you. So the bishop returns back to Wardan, and the Roman commander was furious, and he swore that he would crush the Muslims in one attack. Okay, so Wardan now ordered a line of archers and slingers to be positioned ahead of the Roman front. So now they're up a little bit more, and they are in amazing striking distance to the Muslim army by doing this. Okay, so Khalid tells them, he says, this is Muwaith. So Muwaith was getting ready to tell his men to attack, and Khalid told him, don't do that yet. And don't do it until the sun passes its zenith. So Muwaith had wished to attack the Roman archers with better bows, because he knew they had bigger bows which could had a greater distance than what the Muslims had. So he wanted to kind of run where they didn't have run towards them where they didn't have that ability to strike them like they did. So what happens is Khalid didn't want to risk a reverse by launching a premature attack against a well-formed legions of the Romans, and thus a couple of hours before noon. Okay, so the battle began with action of the Roman archers and slingers. So this phase of the battle went against the Muslims, and several whom were killed and many were wounded. Okay, so they shot these arrows, and a lot of Muslims got affected by this. So this suited the Romans were very happy, and these like missiles was flying in hundreds, you know, going into the Muslim camp. So the Muslims were unable to do anything to offset this Roman advantage, and they became impatient and wanted to go, but Khalid had restrained them again. So what happens? Dirar comes to Khalid like, "What are we doing?" He said, "Why are we waiting when Allah, the Most High, is on our side? By Allah, our enemies will think that we are afraid of them. Order the attack, and we shall attack, with you. So Khalid decided to let individual champions go into combat against the Roman champions. So once again, now they're getting into a duel situation, and the Muslims would have the advantage in this duel situation. So many of the it's to try to eliminate as many of the Roman officers as they possibly could. All right. So he tells the Virar, listen, you could go ahead and attack. So he moves with his horse, forward. And the Roman archers, Virar kept on his coat of mail this time and his helmet. And he had a shield made of elephant hide. And this is something they had killed some Romans. He had taken it from a Roman soldier, and he'd gone halfway to the Roman line, and he makes this battle cry. He said, I am the death of the pale ones. I am the killer of the Romans, and I am a scourge sent upon you, and I am Virar bin al-Azwar. So as for a few Roman champions, they went to his call, and he quickly took his stuff off, as usual. And now they know, oh man, this is the person who we've been hearing about. This is the naked champion. So in a few minutes, he killed several Romans, including 2 generals, and one of them was the governor of Amman, and the other was the governor of Tiberias. So about a group of 10 officers emerged from the Roman army and moved towards Virar. And Khalid picked 10 of his people and riding up, intercept and killed the Romans. So no more champions came forward from both sides, some individuals and other groups. But gradually, the dueling increased to the extent that it got intensified. And it continued for about 2 hours, during which the Roman archers and slingers remained inactive. So now what Khalid wanted to do is to draw their people out there with the you're not going to end up shooting your own people. All right. So his plan worked perfectly in terms of trying to mess their resolve and their zeal in terms of fighting the Muslims, because he killed several generals, you know what I mean, in this particular situation, and killed some other soldiers of high-ranking status among the Roman Empire. So there was no frontal struggle and with no fine maneuver, and either side attempting to outflank the other. So it was a hard slogging match in close quarters, and this continued for some hours. So in the late afternoon, everybody on both sides were tired, and they broke contact and they fell back, and no more could be done on this day. So the losses of the Romans were staggering. Wardan was shocked to learn that thousands of his soldiers had been killed, and only compared to a few Muslims, compared to their number, had been accounted for in terms of being killed. So he called a council of war, at which he expressed his misgivings in the outcome of the battle, and his generals swore that they would fight to the last person. And I want to tell this particular story because I know we coming in, and I don't want to leave y'all on a cliffhanger on this particular one. So Wardan, he asked for ideas, and they had made various suggestions. And one that was made to him was like, look, we need to kill this commander. The sword of Allah, this is the person who we need to kill. If we get him, everything pretty much is going to be a done deal. So Wardan personally would go forward in the morning, and what he would do is offer peace and ask for Khalid to come forth in order to discuss the terms with him. So when Khalid had approached near Wardan, he would engage him in combat. Then on his signal, Wardan would have 10 men who were hiding behind like a hillock, and they would rush up and they would kill Khalid and cut him to pieces. So Wardan, he was a brave general, and he agreed to that particular plan that the person that came up with. So the Muslims would be the men would be positioned during the night and would carefully be briefed about what their role was going to be. All right. So it's not like there's street lights out there. It's pitch black at nighttime. So they were going to go and they were going to hide in this particular area. So the Roman commander, he sent a Christian by the name of David, and he was a member of his staff. So with instructions to proceed to the Muslim, he goes to Khalid to present this situation by saying, listen, you know, this is what he wants to do. But basically, when they tell him that, look, man, I'm going to go and negotiate peace, David was like, I'm not with doing that. These people were very, word I'm looking for, loyal to Heraclius. All right. So when he told him that he was going to go, I want you to go there and offer him peace. This David was like, I'm not doing that. That's totally against the instructions of Heraclius. And he told us to fight the Muslims and push them back into the desert. So he refused. He said, I'm not going and telling them that. So what Wardan did, he told them of the entire plot and the plan of what they were getting ready to do. Okay. And he said, okay, cool. So the sun hadn't risen yet, and he walked into the Muslim camp, and it was still arrayed in battle order. So the Muslims was ready for any type of attack. So they asked to see Khalid on a matter of peace proposed by Wardan. And as soon as Khalid was informed, he came out to David and he stood with this glaring look. All right. Khalid was not known for being, having this beautiful smile towards people and everything else. He's a warrior. And he looks, and it says that the sight of Khalid, he's 6 feet. He's got these chiseled features. He's muscular. And you could tell he had this glare of war in his eyes. So they said that he was weather beaten. His face was scarred up. He had these piercing eyes. And he regarded him as an enemy. So the effect on David was devastating. And so under the gaze of the sword of Allah, he said, I'm only a man. I'm not a man of war. I'm just an emissary. Okay. And we talked about it's in bad taste. It was totally taboo to kill somebody who was a messenger. All right. You didn't do that. So Khalid drew closer to him and he said, look, speak. He said it real harsh. He said, if you are truthful, you'll survive. But if you lie, you're going to die. So the Christian Arabic spoke. He said, listen, Wardan is pained by all the unnecessary bloodshed and wishes for it to be avoided. He's prepared to sign a pact with you and spare those who are still alive. Okay. So there should be no more fighting until the talks are completed. And he proposes that you meet alone between the two armies in the morning and discuss the term of peace. He said, if your master intends deceit, then by Allah, we ourselves are the root of trickery, and there is none like us in a stratagem of in guile. If he has a secret plot, it will only hasten his own end and the annihilation of the rest of you. If on the other hand, he's truthful, then we shall not make peace except by the payment of a jizya. As for any other wealth, we shall soon take it from you anyway. So Khalid's words had this it was unshakable conviction. It wasn't like he was saying it softly. This was somebody in his speech who was extremely determined to do what he was going to do, and this had a major effect on David. So saying that he would go and convey Khalid's message to Wardan, he turned and began to walk away while Khalid was still glaring at him. So Khalid didn't turn his back. He's looking at him. He's staring at him. And he says that, you know what? I can see that these people are going to be victorious. They're going to beat us. I mean, I can look at them. I could tell he's hearing stories about them, the stuff that they've done. They're going to beat us. So what he said, he decided to save himself and his family, and he ended up confessing the truth to Khalid. And he retraced his steps, and he stood before Khalid again, and he revealed the entire plot of the Roman of the commander, and included the place where the 10 men were going to be concealed, and below a hillock to the right of the Roman center. So Khalid promised to spare him and his family on the condition that he didn't tell them that he told them what they was getting ready to do. So on his return to the Roman army, David, he only told him what he told him to tell him. He didn't tell him the second part that he had told Khalid what they had planned on doing. So Wardan was like, yes, good. This is going to work perfectly. So at first, Khalid thought of going. This is not a surprise to any of us. He like, oh, they're gonna set me up? No problem. I got something for that. So he goes to Abu Ubaidah, and Abu Ubaidah is like, nah, I don't necessarily feel comfortable with you doing that. And he talked to him about, that's too much of a risk. And the other people was with him. So what Abu Ubaidah and Khalid do, they choose 10 men and included Dirar. And he was appointed the leader of the party. So he instructed Dirar to be prepared the next morning and to dash out from the front rank of the Muslims and intercept and kill the 10 Romans when they appeared. So they were supposed to be hiding somewhere else. And when these 10 soldiers come out, the Muslims are supposed to surprise them and come out as well. So this was the instruction. Okay. But Dirar, he had another thing in mind. So he was a lot more adventurous and he took chances just like Khalid did. So what he did, he went and took his men in the hours of darkness and he found a place where they was hiding. So they did them and then he killed them in that area. So the Muslims, they took out all 10 of them, they surprised them, took out all 10. So shortly before midnight, Dirar and 9 of his comrades set off to lay in this particular place. So soon after sunrise, Wardan came forward in the whole shebang. He was jeweled out, his armor was jeweled out, and his sword was hanging to his side. So Khalid walked up to the Muslim center and he stood in front of Wardan. And the two armies were already arrayed in battle order. So you got these two courageous generals facing off on each other. All right. So from behind the hillock, he saw out of the corner of his eye, after he had told him that listen, the only thing I'm going to do is fight you until you pay the jizya or you accept Islam. So of course, then Wardan, he draws without drawing his sword, he grabs Khalid and then he yells for the 10 Romans to come running to his aid. Now from behind the hillock, Khalid sees 10 Romans coming racing towards him. And Khalid was now like, oh man, subhanallah. This is, Dirar, he met his end. You understand what I'm saying? They might have got him. That stuff didn't work. And Khalid is like, this is about to be it. He sees them in Roman outfits and they come rushing towards him. So a group, they got near, Wardan is happy. And he's like, yeah, finally, we're going to get you. You fell for our trick. But then what happens, he looks out the corner of his eye and he sees one of them doesn't have a shirt on. And then the truth dawned upon him that all of the other people had gotten killed and that Dirar was the one that was coming over and in a sense of humor. See, mashallah, Dirar had put on these Roman outfits. Now he could have came out like he usually did. He had the Muslims put the Roman outfits on and they're trying to lightweight kind of play a trick on Khalid. And Khalid thought he was got, but they rushed towards, and when he saw that he got tricked, and then he tells him, he says, listen, I beseech you in the name of whatever you worship, kill me yourself and do not let this devil come near me. Talking about Dirar. So Khalid nodded to Dirar like, oh, okay, no problem. And Dirar took his sword and cut Wardan's head off. Okay. So as soon as Wardan was killed, he ordered a general attack at the center, and the wings and the flanks and the guards swept forward and assaulted the Romans, who are now under the command of this the commander-in-chief. So Khalid and all of the officers fought in the front of the men, and so did many other Roman generals who are prepared to die for the glory of the empire. And we know that this is a popular thing in the Roman, that they would come up and people even make fun of how the glory of the empire and the thing that they would say, and they were really true to that. Okay, so it turned into a bunch of dead bodies, and mostly the dead bodies was the Romans. And as the men struggled without no type of rest, So at last, the two sides were reaching a point of exhaustion, and Khalid then told Yazid, who has fresh 4,000 men, to come running into the center and reinforce the Muslims, and they broke through several places and divided wedges in the Roman army. This is huge. So in the center, a Muslim group got to where this commander-in-chief stood with his head wrapped in a cloth, and they killed him. So it's believed that he had ordered that his head be wrapped because he could no longer bear to see such carnage. So with the death of the commander-in-chief, the Roman resistance, it weakened and it collapsed entirely, and the Romans started fleeing off of the battlefield. So it was safer to stand and fight the Muslims instead of running away from them. So now remember, the Muslims now have it down to a science as it relates to when people start running off the battlefield, because that was always an issue. They would run off the battlefield and then they would go and join other forces. They're not prisoners of war. They're running and with the intention of fighting the Muslims another day. So it was a complete victory. Ajadayn was taken, and the Muslims had fought a set-piece battle after the regular in a imperial fashion, and were not defeated tactically, and also the people were slaughtered as well. So the Romans assembled, and although a sizable portion had managed to get away, especially the part they end up fleeing to Jerusalem, and they found safety in the walls. In the first great encounter between Islam and Byzantium, the followers of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had ended up conquering them. Okay, so in the victory in the Battle of Ajadayn opened up a way for the conquest of Syria itself, and this land could not be conquered in a single battle. Of course, the Byzantine Empire was huge, so a large imperial forces remained in the cities of Syria, Philistine, and the Roman emperor could draw on the resources of the whole empire, which stretched from Armenia to the Balkans. Okay, but the first great clash with the Romans was over, and the Muslims could now continue their campaign with the confidence that they would have no less success in future battles and fighting with the Romans. And mashallah, we will stop there. And I apologize for going over, but I didn't want to leave y'all on a cliffhanger this time. And it's more.